Okay, everyone should be in.
Thank you. Hey, everyone, thank you for being with us for amazingly our last meeting of the year. Um, you know, again, as we come into the holidays, I hope that everyone takes some of the time to just enjoy and go into that hopefully time for yourself, knowing how incredibly grateful we are to all of you for your work with us over this past year, and for some of you over many, many years. As members of our task force know well, every month I begin our meetings by talking about where we stand in terms of our numbers. And we do that because that's how we measure work. That's where we see places that we need to increase our efforts. But we do it knowing that even one person losing their life to an overdose is too many. And we do it using the metric that we've developed, which is very, very low, which is if we think about not just the numbers of people who have lost their life to an overdose, but the number of people they impact, and even setting that number at the very low number of the death of every person impacts at least 10 other people. You see where we are in terms of those numbers. And where we are right now, although, and again, calling to mind that even one death is too many, I think especially for those of you who've been with us for a long time, you'll recognize sort of the significance of what we're talking about. We are now at the last meeting of the year with, I guess today's the 11th, so 20 days left in the year. And we have, since January of this year, experienced across this very large county with a population of 1.8 million people, 92 opioid overdose deaths. That is the first time in the over 13 years that we have been doing this work with the task force that we've come to the end of the year with a number still in double digits. And beginning where we were and where we went for a very long time, despite all the investment of time, talent, and treasure, I view this as just really remarkable. And a place, frankly, as we worked and labored and the numbers just continued to go up, I never thought we would be able to get to. So that, again, another 24% month over month decrease is so significant and really due to the hard work of many of the folks here on this task force, as well as others in the community. In addition, what is especially noteworthy, you recall that we have been for the last year or so, because the numbers were going up at a concerning rate, looking at those opioid overdose deaths that we were considering as a death by suicide. And we do that only when there is a very significant indication that that is what happened. So there certainly are some that may well have been deaths by suicide that we do not count, because for any number of reasons, we classify it that way only with extraordinary amounts of evidence. And for the last year and a half or so, those numbers had continued to tick up, even as the other numbers were going down. And that was very concerning. We've really put a push on there. And I am really so gratified to say that this month, that number has dropped by 50% from last month. And again, it is a reflection of the work that's being done across the county. But, keep in mind that the holidays are a time of challenge, both for people who are still struggling and for those who have lost someone. And I hope that as you hear the presentation today, we'll really be taking a minute to just think about those people we've lost and their loved ones who worked so hard at keeping their memory alive. And, in addition to the loss and the trauma to families and friends directly impacted, we really rarely acknowledge the kind of secondary trauma that many of us can feel from our involvement in this work. Whether you are a law enforcement official, a social worker, a healthcare professional, a recovery coach, or some other stakeholder, many of you are working every day with people who are actively struggling with substance abuse disorder. And that can take a serious toll, especially when the news is not always good and someone may continue to struggle or relapse. And I'm really delighted to have with us Jill Shanahan today for support after death by an overdose to talk about resources for families and loved ones of those we've lost, but also how to protect yourself and your colleagues. And, I to continue to give that same high quality of care and compassion, you also have to take care of yourself. So that'll be an important discussion we'll have in a few minutes. I also want to acknowledge all of the work that the task force has done over this year. As you remember, and many of you were there, we had two in-person meetings, one with Congressman Jake Archincloss and one with former Secretary Marty Walsh. We've covered a wide variety of issues from substance use in the trades to efforts that are occurring to curb fentanyl trafficking and kratom. So I'm so grateful for that commitment that they have made, as well as others that are helping us in this work. And in addition, I talk all the time about the fact that Middlesex County is really the hub of innovation. And it's important that we be using those innovative ideas and technology in all of our work, and especially how that might be harnessed in dealing with the opioid epidemic. And giving the increasing influence, and there'll be a debate today in Boston about this, about the effect of artificial intelligence and data on the world. Over the next few months, I'm really hoping to highlight the way that people both here in Massachusetts and across the country are using technology to interrupt drug trafficking and improve the continuum of care for individuals seeking help. We're very lucky today to have Dr. David Eddy here with us to talk about one of those innovations. I'm going to, and I apologize in advance for this. We have a situation that I'm going to probably have to step out a little bit to monitor. So in order not to miss really acquainting you with our speakers, I'm going to introduce both Jill Shanahan and Dr. Eddy right now, and then we'll hear from Jill and then turn to Dr. Eddy. So Jill Shanahan is a queer neurodivergent harm reductionist. She is a person herself in recovery from chaotic alcohol use. She has a bachelor's degree from UMass Dartmouth, and she spent 15 years working in Massachusetts with people who are actively using drugs in drop-in centers, syringe service programs, and other settings. And doing that work, and then working as an assistant director in direct service programs, she became increasingly aware, and many of us know this well, of the lack of support for people experiencing trauma, distress, or grief who continue in worsening circumstances. And Jill met Franklin Cook, the director of support after a death by overdose in 2017. And she's now helping to build the direct service provider program for that organization. She's currently a facilitator for a grief support group for those in recovery. She's a member of the Massachusetts Harm Reduction Advisory Council and works very closely both with her peers and with BSAS to help support the harm reduction and syringe service program in the way of consulting and training and helping to build institutional memory for the BSATS program. So Jill will join us today to share support after a death by overdoses program offerings. And we will next hear from Dr. David Eddy, who is the Associate Director of Clinical Translational Recovery Science at Mass General's Recovery Research Institute. He's also a faculty member of the Center for Addiction Medicine and Digital Mental Health. He is by training a clinical psychologist at Mass General's Department of Psychiatry. He's an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and is board certified in addiction psychology. He received his bachelor's degree from Columbia and his PhD in clinical psychology from Rutgers, and completed a clinical residency and a postdoctoral research fellowship at Mass General. And Dr. Eddy's going to talk about a development in technology, specifically his research on heart rate variability, biofacts potential to treat substance use disorder. So I thank you both for being here. And I am at this point going to turn it over to Jill. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for that bio. Reminds me I have to update some of that. Yeah, I'm here with my coworker and colleague and friend Gabe. We both do the direct service provider program together. So, Gabe, I don't know if you want to give an intro for yourself before we jump in.
Uh, I'll introduce myself by saying, howdy, my name is Gabe. There we go. Pleasure to meet everybody. So if we just want to get into it, we're going to talk a bit about the program at SAT-OD, Support After Death by Overdose. We always like to bring up first too, although support after death by or overdose is in our name, we support people who've lost someone from any kind of substance-related cause, not just overdose, but endocarditis, complications from Hep C, complications from cirrhosis. Um, Although overdose is in the name, as I said, it could be any of those substance use-related causes. This is our brief, description that we utilize more nowadays. It used to be much more lengthy, but um, just to give the idea that we stand with people across Massachusetts grieving the death of a loved one, someone you supported, someone in your community due to substance related causes. We're here to meet people peer to peer, wherever they are in their grief journey. So, the way that we provide support for folks is through peer grief support, supporting each other, which, as we've seen, has been a great model in all kinds of facets of life and substance use related issues.
Um, yeah, thanks, Gabe. So we're not going to get a ton into this because we have plenty of trainings that go deeper into these, but I think it's important to kind of give more context of the work that we do as direct service providers. So Gabe and I work with anybody from people that are nursing and doing outreach, working in MOUD, detox, corrections, harm reduction, recovery coaching. So, all those different experiences, regardless of where we're coming from, these are like kind of like the highlighted types of grief and loss that we all come across. And there's quite a few up there. A lot of them kind of intersect as well. And I would just like to highlight mostly about disenfranchised, which is really about the stigma related to the types of deaths and the things that come with the deaths, from suicide and substance use and all of that. These are some research papers that I pulled to kind of demonstrate what I was just talking about. And I can provide these for anybody if they're interested in it, because there's not a ton of it out there, but these are really looking at different types of burnout and vicarious trauma, and the effects that that has on harm reduction folk and, people that are in recovery that are doing this work, social workers, et cetera. So there's actually, a lens towards this now to be like, okay, there's clearly a need for other types of support than what's actually offered. So that's kind of like the big question mark that we're all still in. Yeah, we put here too because this is, it's important to note that a lot of us that do this work come to this work for, a lot of personal reasons often. Many of us are in some kind of recovery or use substances, whether that's chaotically or not. And often, in general, people turn to increased behaviors. Sometimes that's substance use, sometimes that's other types of things when they're in grief. So it's really important for us as providers to talk about this with each other because that can help kind of reduce the burden that's carried and remind us that even though this can feel very isolating, that we do have this common thread together. I don't know, Gabe, if you want to elaborate on any of that.
And just to add as well that, while our major focus is, of course, the grief and loss connected to our work, um, providers find that their grief and loss is connected to a lot of other things, such as, moral injury, and a lot of the things that we can do to kind of help sustain ourselves and to build resilience. We're going to help kind of with the other things going on in work, that's the to build resilience, such as, you know, um, just talking about it, and they're all very interconnected. So we kind of try to touch on these other areas, such as moral injury and vicarious trauma as well. And we find that the things that help us build resilience around grief are going to help build resilience kind of generally. So we feel that it kind of we kind of branch out a little bit more than the rest of the organization that serves the general public.
Yeah, I also want to note too, because I think it's really important, something I've been thinking about a lot lately in our work in general, the work that Gabe and I do, and the work that everybody's doing out there is that like the problems truly are very big right now, very, very big in many communities. There's many city ordinances right now that are trying to take away syringe exchange programs that are trying to criminalize the unhoused right now. So this is another huge layer of a lot of what we deal with in direct service. And the things that we feel like we have no control over, but we still have to figure out how to support people in those moments. So I just wanted to name that as well because it's very relevant to what's going on. And, there's certain communities, especially I'll just say, folks out in Boston that are dealing with things that are unprecedented in a lot of our work in this lifetime. And I say that as somebody who's done this work for 17 years. So there's a lot going on right now. Now is more important than ever that we try to figure out how to take care of each other.
There's quite a few different areas that we work in, or things that we offer folks in our program. Of course, one is we twice a month that we have a direct service provider peer grief support group, just for folks to get together to talk about grief and loss and other issues related to that. As I mentioned, we meet twice a month, the second Monday at 6 p.m. and the second Friday at 10 a.m. It's very low barrier. The groups have been, quite small lately. There's been kind of cyclic at times that there's more people showing up, sometimes less. But they are, just a very basic, kind of support group where we begin with a ritual of candle lighting, tradition of candle lighting, and tradition of bringing people into the room where we, just say the name or talk a little bit about it, someone that we've lost that, we want to share with people. There's an open discussion, and then we end with a short period of mindfulness, meditation, or possibly just a reading a lot of times. And we just do that to have a space where people can talk about these issues because, a lot of it is that we don't often talk about the grief and loss and the other issues that we experience from work, and it can kind of build up. Do you want to talk about the workshops, Jill?
Sure. Yeah, I would say a huge part of our program, some of the most popular are workshops that we deliver. And these are all created by Gabe and I with the information and experiences that folks share with us when they come to our trainings. And so it's really developed, from the experience and peer lens of people that have done this work in different sectors. So we offer these two a month online that are free. So if you get onto our mailing listserv, you will get info about all of that. And these are things that we can also do for teams as capacity allows. We love to come on site to work with teams and do these in person. And then we can also do them over Zoom too. And I think what's good about these, because they're different from like you do learn skills, you do learn nervous system tending and tools and stuff like that in terms of like breathing and other types of, practical tools to actually use during your workday, but it also does create this kind of, community type feeling that doesn't necessarily just happen in training. So I like that aspect about this part of the work. And then these are just a list of some of the options that we have. Grief and loss for direct service providers. We're actually doing that today at 1 p.m. To 3 p.m. over Zoom. We have advocacy because we find a lot of people tend to want to get behind the issues that are really challenging that sometimes we feel we don't have power to control. So that kind of talks with direct service providers on how to, get involved in advocacy. And then, a few other ones, nervous system education, and then being grief informed, which is like how to support others that are grieving around you.
and we'll just talk about again, a major part of it is all the work that we do in the community across Massachusetts. I don't think we mentioned it earlier, but we are funded by BSAS to serve the people of Massachusetts across the board. You know, so if you go to our website, there's our actual referral form, which is a great place to start. We always like to bring that up first, that people can either self-refer or, of course, with their permission, you could refer someone, as a third party, and we can have someone contact them who's a peer grief support specialist, someone who can kind of provide them some peer grief support in the moment and talk to them about practical things as well to some degree. They might know, a little bit about, how you would find a probate lawyer. Of course, they can't, find one for you, but they could help explain that type of thing. They know a little bit about where all the burial funds might be available for folks in the state of Massachusetts who can't afford burial and that type of stuff. And then also talk to them about the wide range of services that we do offer at SATOD, such as a one-to-one peer grief ally program that we have where we match people up and they navigate a relationship, whether that's they talk on the phone once a week or go to a meeting together once a month or what have you. And people have been in that program from anywhere from a few months to a few years, working with each other, being supported. They Within that, we also have, a lot of groups that we do with our partner, The Sun Will Rise, some we do ourselves. The vast lion's share is done by The Sun Will Rise, one of our great partners who hopefully folks know about it, but if not, please get in touch. We can, talk to you more about The Sun Will Rise and connect you with them. But there's, something about 60 some odd meetings, I think, across the state that are provide peer grief support for folks who've lost someone specifically from a substance related cause, because, that was kind of an onus for us to start and for The Sun Will Rise as well, that to have peer grief support in the context of having lost someone from a substance related cause, because that was the stigma and the particularities of that. People felt it was important to have, groups within that context. Got ahead of myself again. Um, so if you go to this other portion of our website or the Sun Will Rise website, you can find a directory of all of these groups that I mentioned. Um, Many of them are very specific to, certain things, such as, a group for mothers. There's groups for grandparents who are raising grandchildren, which of course is open to other people as well. If it's a great aunt or an uncle raising someone's children who's passed away from a substance related cause, that's a very, specific one. And then of course, there are just kind of general peer grief support groups for folks who have lost someone from a substance related cause. We now have two groups in Spanish, I believe, two or three. No, it's two groups now. We also, I forgot to mention the previous slide, but we do have people in the Peer Grief Ally program who are fluent in Spanish, if that's something someone is looking for. And we also have things such as we have online memorials, and I really encourage folks, if you're working directly with folks, out there, especially if they're under-resourced or experiencing homelessness, this is a resource that I used in the past for folks when I was working in direct service. It's a kind of a virtual memorial space that allows people to put up a picture and, a couple, as much as they like to write about them, from a couple sentences to a couple paragraphs if they want. Because when I was working with people, I'd be working with a couple maybe who was experiencing homelessness, and one of the partners would pass away, and they would tell me, there's no place to, they're not going to have an obituary, they're not going to have a memorial service or anything. I wish there was something I could do to, have a place, to memorialize them. And I said, oh, well, we can go on this website and do it. We just need an email address. And if you don't have one, you can use mine. So I encourage people to look up that one if you're in that situation where someone might be able to utilize that. We also have Faces and Voices, which is kind of more of a, a memorialization through artistic expression. We have monthly workshops and educational workshops for folks who've experienced loss, just talking about very specific topics, such as like meaning making and storytelling, or just kind of you know, general things that come up for folks who are experiencing grief from losing a family member or a loved one. We have one of those a month, or I'm sorry, we have two of those a month. One that just anyone can attend, of course. Another one we do record every month, so that like people who go to that one just need to know that it's going to be recorded for people to watch later to consume that way. Um, so um, that's about. I don't know if I missed anything on that, Jill. Sorry, I have a little in my throat.
No, I think that was a pretty comprehensive overview. Um, so I think we're actually pretty at time, and that might be the last slide, or we have one more slide that I think is just the contact information. So yeah, there's a ton of different types of support out there. You know, there's support for the workers, and then there's also support for the folks that you're probably working with and or your family and friends, and maybe even yourself. Whether that's, you know, one-on-one support or groups. So hopefully, you know, there's something in here that is helpful to people out there. And as somebody said before, you know, this time of year specifically can be really hard for people. I know it is for me. So yeah, just thanks for being here and listening to this, and reach out if you need anything.
Does anybody have any questions?
Jill and Gabe, thanks. That was great. So incredibly informative. We're really grateful that you could join us. And do you have any objection if we share the slides?
No, please do. I sent them in already this morning. So yeah,
Awesome.
go for it.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much. All right.
Jill and Gabe, that was great. Thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Eddie at this point, and then maybe we could do all the questions at the end if that works for people.
Sounds good.
Thank
Alice,
you.
how long should I take?
What would work? What is best for you, Doctor?
I can take I'll take as much time as I can get, but
Take it.
I want to make sure there's time for questions.
You've certainly got 35, 40 minutes.
Okay, great,
Perfect.
great. So I can unpack things a little bit. So let me just share some slides. I put together, it's a bit of a technical talk, and I don't want to get too in the weeds because I know we've got a mixed audience here, but it's a pleasure to be with you all today. And thank you, Jill and Gabe, for the important work you're doing. Uh, uh, there's just so much need. And, you know, I'm so glad that community organizations such as yours are out there doing this important work. And so, you know, from my bio that I'm a clinical psychologist working at Mass General Hospital, and my research interests are primarily in digital therapeutics for substance use disorder. So I'm really interested in how we can leverage technology to help people recover from addiction. And I want to talk to you today about one such digital therapeutic, or really it's an intervention. It's a breathing-based intervention called heart rate variability biofeedback. And this, really my journey with this intervention started in grad school. I trained under a couple of brilliant physiologists, a Russian, Evgeny Vashilo, and an American, Paul Lehrer, who were both at Rutgers at the time when I was doing my PhD. And Evgeny had escaped the Soviet Union, where he was an important scientist, and he'd come to the United States. He developed this idea that by breathing at certain frequencies, breathing in special ways, we could manipulate the autonomic nervous system to essentially affect, you know, massive shifts from fight or flight to rest and digest. And I'll get into that a little more. And he connected with Paul Lehrer, who was doing similar work in the United States. And Paul actually sort of was instrumental in helping him get out to the United States from the Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 90s. And this work, their work together ultimately led to this intervention. And so I'm going to be talking to you about some clinical trial results from a phase 2 clinical trial we just wrapped up with the support from the National Institute of Drug Abuse. But I really want to frame it more broadly in the intervention because most of you won't be familiar with HIV biofeedback. So I really want to tell you, like, about this intervention because it really does seem to have utility, not just for folks with substance use disorder, but for folks who struggle to regulate um, mood, negative affect, anxiety, stress. So we've seen a lot of clinical applications for HIV biofeedback, but I'm particularly interested in substance use disorder. That's the population I work with. And this is the third clinical trial of this intervention with this population that I've run. So I'm not going to get too in the weeds on the physiology, but most of you are probably familiar with the autonomic nervous system and know there's two branches, the fight or flight branch, which we call the sympathetic branch, and the rest and digest branch, which is the parasympathetic branch. And really, like put simply, when things are working well in the human brain and body, these two are, I wouldn't say balanced, but they're working in a complementary fashion. We're able to elicit a response to a stressor as needed, and put our foot on the gas a little bit physiologically, as it were, to engage some kind of goal-oriented behavior. We also, after a stress or a challenge, we want to be able to reset. We want to return to baseline. And that's when that sort of rest and digest branch comes in. So it's okay to be a little activated, fight or flight wise, but we want the rest and digest to kick in when the stressor or the challenge has passed or the danger has passed. Right? And healthy people have pretty good flexibility in their autonomic nervous system. And that's why they're able to regulate emotion pretty well. Like healthy people can experience stress and they respond and then, they recover pretty quickly. But a lot of the folks we work with, like with substance use disorder or anxiety disorders, PTSD, panic disorder, when they're stressed, when their fight or flight response is engaged, they have a lot of trouble getting back down. They have a lot of trouble engaging their rest and digest branch, and they stay what we call hyper aroused. And that can be problematic, especially if you're somebody in early recovery from substance use disorder and you're desperately trying not to resume using alcohol or, say, opioids, right? You experience a stressor, your sympathetically fight or flight system is engaged. You have a lot of trouble engaging that rest and digest branch and cooling off, right? What does your brain go to? Hit of heroin would fix this. A drink would fix this, whatever it is, right? And so that can lead to craving, urges to drink or use other drugs, right? And we know this is like a classic sort of relapse pathway for people in like an early recovery from substance use disorder. And one of the most important thing we can do for folks in early recovery is give them the tools and strategies they need to sort of manage that hyperarousal and sort of engage their rest and digest branch and get through those moments and sort of cope more effectively. Because what we don't want is folks going back to a substance to cope. So we want other skills, tools, and strategies that they can use in the moment to manage better. And so that can include like cognitive behavioral therapy. And we have all kinds of really great tools in CBT, in cognitive behavioral therapy, that we can use to help people ride out craving and cope more effectively. We have medications as well, which can be incredibly effective, like buprenorphine, Suboxone, for opioid use disorder, can be incredibly helpful in helping people ride out these moments. But what I want to present today is another sort of a breathing-based, non-pharmacological intervention that can also, we think, help people in the moment. So let me just give you a high level of the physiology here. When we breathe in, let me go to the next slide. When we breathe in, our heart rate increases a little bit, and when we breathe out, it slows down. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but your heart rhythm is actually highly variable. And that's actually a healthy thing. Higher variance in heart rate, which we call heart rate variability, is actually a biomarker of health. It reflects like flexibility, biobehavioral flexibility. And so heart rate's changing all the time in response to situational demands. That's healthy. What we see in folks with substance use disorder, they have low heart rate variability, low flexibility, low biobehavioral flexibility, right? Healthy people have higher heart rate variability. But when we breathe at certain frequencies, what we can do is we can take advantage of a physiological phenomena called the respiratory sinus arrhythmia that links the respiratory system, the lungs, to the cardiovascular system. So when we breathe in, stretch receptors in the chest sense we're breathing in, sends a signal up to the brain. The brain sends a signal to the heart, telling it to speed up a little bit. And evolutionary biologists think we probably evolved with this capacity because it seems to improve blood oxygenation. I mean, and it kind of makes sense. Like when there's air in the lungs, you want to get as much blood through as possible. And then it also makes sense that when there's less air in the lungs, when they're deflated, maybe you slow heart rate down a little bit, save some energy, less wear and tear on the heart. So it kind of makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. But so that's the interesting thing. So when we breathe in, our heart rate speeds up. And when we breathe out, it slows down. So we can't consciously increase our heart rate variability, but we can consciously manipulate our breath, which indirectly affects heart rate variability. And behind that, the physiology, the regulation of heart rate variability, it's parasympathetic, it's rest and digest. It's almost 100% mediated through the rest and digest branch. So essentially what we're doing when we breathe in at about 6 breaths per minute, breathe in and out, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. We're essentially eliciting, ramping up the rest and digest branch of the parasympathetic nervous system. And what that does is it has a suppressor effect on the fight or flight branch. So this gives us a powerful tool in the moment to self-regulate, whether we're feeling the onset of a panic attack, whether we're experiencing cravings or urges to use opioids or whatever other substance, or an urge to engage in any kind of maladaptive behavior that's not in line with how we want to be living. But here's the interesting thing with this breathing-based intervention. It doesn't just give us a powerful tool in the moment, it can also help us chronically. We know when people practice about 10 minutes a day of this breathing, they buffer stress more effectively. We see clinically significant reductions in anxiety and symptoms of depression. This is in people with clinical pathology, right? And in my previous clinical trials, we have seen significant reductions in cravings in people in early recovery from substance use disorder. Now, this is a breathing-based intervention, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. You can do it just with a clock, right? I could teach you to do this today in a few minutes. We like to teach it with biofeedback because that's just reinforcing. So more reinforcing. So in biofeedback, we actually put sensors on the body and allow people to visualize their physiology in real time. And we use that to guide their breathing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. All right, let's jump to the device now. So early heart rate variability biofeedback devices were kind of clunky, lab-based. This was a difficult intervention to access in that there weren't that many providers who knew how to teach it. Even though at its fundamental core, it's a pretty simple intervention. It's breathing, right? I mean, how hard is that to learn? But there really weren't any providers that knew the biofeedback piece, very few. And the equipment was pretty expensive. And there were some handheld practice devices, but they were kind of clunky and not super intuitive. So they really took off. A few years ago, there was a guy called Rohan Dixit who was a grad student, engineering grad student at MIT, and he had generalized anxiety. And he had done heart rate variability biofeedback with a provider and had essentially resolved his anxiety disorder. And he thought, man, this really should be something everybody has access to. Like, and there's really not a good product in the market that allows people to sort of to do this in this practice in an intuitive way without the help of a provider, a clinician. And so he went out to Silicon Valley and he started this company, Leaf Therapeutics, and he developed this product. It's a wearable. And this is the wearable we tested in the clinical trial. And I have no like financial interest in this product, but I do think it's very, very good at what it does. And what I like about this is instead of sort of being a handheld biofeedback device that you clip onto the finger, essentially it's a patch. It's an electrocardiogram monitor that you stick on the thorax under the left pectoral, and it monitors your physiology in the background. And it connects to an app. And so it allows the end user to do heart rate variability biofeedback practice on demand whenever they want, ad libitum, as much as they want. But what I really loved about this device when I first came across it was it also acts as what we call in the industry like a just-in-time intervention. It's actually capable of sensing risk and getting out in front of the risk before the wearer is even aware of the risk. And so what it does, because it's monitoring physiology in the background, it can sense shifts in the autonomic nervous system in terms of heart rate and heart rate variability, indicative of stress, right? And the algorithm's a little complex, but it can do this pretty reliable. And what it does when it senses stress is it triggers the end user to engage in brief bursts of the breathing practice to essentially get that sympathetic branch under control, get the fight or flight branch turned down a bit, and dial up the parasympathetic rest and digest branch, essentially restoring balance in the autonomic nervous system. Right? So it does this by tapping the end user when it senses stress, gives you a couple of little taps using haptics in the patch. So it's not even an alert on the phone. And if you want to do a quick burst of practice, you just tap it twice and it starts tapping you as you breathe in. It's tapping, tapping, tapping. You breathe out. It starts tap, tap, tap to cue you to breathe in, breathe out. And it basically has you continue to practice for 1 or 2 minutes until your heart rate variability is increased again, then it stops. Now, if you're too busy and you can't respond, you just tap it once and it dismisses the alert. But so this is a powerful tool because not only can you use it when you need it, if you feel like you're stressed, it's also sensing stress before maybe the end user is aware of their stress. And you might say, well, like, how do people not know whether they're stressed? Well, people who are healthy psychologically and physically are often really in tune with their stress and very cued in and very effective around that. But for folks with substance use disorder, especially early recovery, they're not. They're not. This is one of the inherent challenges of early recovery, is sort of poor self-awareness of emotional affective states. Right? Now, this doesn't mean like people aren't feeling discomfort. It's just that, some kind of stressor arises and in early recovery, folks can go just straight to craving, straight to urges, and there's not a lot in between. What this device has the potential to do is to alert people in the moment and just say, hey, look, things seem a little off here. Right? Things seem maybe need to do a quick burst of practice, get things physiologically under control. Because if we're physiologically under control, we're more likely to be psychologically under control. So maybe let's leave questions to the end. If anyone's got a clarifying question, feel free to jump in at this moment before I talk about the trial. Okay. So I really wanted to test this new technology. I kind of think of it as sort of the second generation HRV biofeedback technology. So I put in for some funding from the National Institute of Drug Abuse to do an 8-week outpatient clinical trial. We recruited from across the United States and we conducted the entire study remotely. We'd actually send devices to folks through the mail. And folks, when they came into the study, were randomized to either treatment as usual plus HRV biofeedback. So that meant they came in, we're like, whatever you're already doing, keep doing it. If you're going to AA meetings, NA meetings, psychotherapy, if you're doing medication, pharmacotherapy, keep doing that. We're also going to add in the biofeedback. And the reason we frame the study in that way was because we really think about this treatment as not a replacement for that other stuff, but really just an addendum or an add-on. It's another tool, skill, or strategy people can be using. And alternatively, the other group was just treatment as usual only. So folks randomized to that group, we just said, keep doing what you're doing. Now, what we did across both groups is we surveyed people everybody twice a day on a smartphone app just to check in. In that, tell us right now, how stressed are you right now? How nervous are you? How much craving you experience on a scale of 0 to 10? How happy are you? How confident are you? You're going to remain abstinent for the rest of the day. Okay. So quick bursts of surveys, like 1 minute to complete, same survey each time. But what this does is it gives us this really sort of powerful longitudinal design where we've got like these repeated measures, and we can really start teasing out relationships between like how HIV biofeedback practice might be affecting mood and subsequent substance use, which I'll be able to show you in the results. So we created a couple of composite scores. So we created a negative affect, sort of a negative emotions score, which included sadness, guilt, nervousness, tiredness, stress, and anger. And we had a positive affective measure, which is happiness, calmness, and energy. And then we asked people about their craving, and we kept that separate, even though you could maybe think about that as a form of negative affect. And we had a couple of things we wanted to test here. Firstly, we wanted to know, like, and of course we measured substance use as well. Have you used? I should have mentioned that. Have we used substances since the last survey? Was included in each survey. So what we really wanted to know is, like, one, does biofeedback help reduce substance use lapses, like the probability of substance use within any given day? That was like our big question. We wanted to know, but does it reduce craving and negative affect? Does it potentially increase positive affect? But also we had a sort of a mechanistic hypothesis. We were thinking that, like, people could use the biofeedback in the moment to ride out craving. And the reason that we hypothesize that is because in previous trials, so some of the feedback we'd gotten from participants was that they were using it strategically in the moment. Even though we weren't really telling them to do that, they were using biofeedback in the moment to ride out like panic symptoms, craving, and it seemed to be helping them. So we really wanted to test that mechanism in this study. And our ecological momentary assessment design really allowed us to do that, because we could look and see, well, if somebody has having craving in the morning, if they practice HIV biofeedback subsequently within that day, were they less likely to lapse to substance use later in the day? That was the question. We hypothesized that would be the case. The craving, so biofeedback practice would disrupt the relationship between craving earlier in the day and substance use later in the day. So, but let's start with let me show you the results. First up, in terms of craving, what do we see? Well, we saw significant reductions in craving in the biofeedback group and slight increases in craving in our control group. So this is a clinically meaningful medium effect size, like significant effect. So we saw, as hypothesized, reductions in craving. We also saw reductions in negative affect in our biofeedback group. So that's stress, right? Anxiety, nervousness, tension. We saw significant reductions across the 8-week study, whereas we saw slight increases in our control group. But here's really what I think was the most important finding, perhaps the most important finding from this study, is that we saw a 64% lower proportion of alcohol and other drug day use in our biofeedback group. That's a large effect size difference, right? And so it made us think, like, that perhaps, as we'd hypothesized, people really were using this intervention strategically in the moment. It really was helping them ride out craving and negative affect. And I should have mentioned, these are all folks, I should have described this population, our sample. These are all folks, and we're in the first year of recovery from a substance use disorder, so alcohol or other drugs, including opioids. So it was a real mix of mostly alcohol and opioids as primary this population. So this is a meaningful effect size. This is kind of on the order of like effects we would see for cognitive behavioral therapy or a really good pharmacological intervention. So that was really meaningful. And we also saw, and I won't get into this plot, it's a bit gets a bit complicated, but essentially our hypothesis about, HRV biofeedback disrupting the relationship between craving earlier in the day and substance use later in the day, it absolutely played out. That's exactly what we saw, right? It really did seem that people were using it strategically in the moment to help reduce the probability that they would lapse to substance use later in the day. And we know that because people didn't practice anywhere near as much as we told them to. We'd hoped that they would do 15 minutes a day of biofeedback practice. We said do like 10 minutes of scheduled practice, 5 in the morning, 5 in the afternoon or evening, and then try and do like 5 minutes of practice in response to the prompts, or just if you're consciously aware you're having craving and urges and or feeling stressed, do a brief burst of practice. People practice on average about 8.5 minutes a day. So they didn't even really reach the threshold that we thought would be therapeutic. And yet we saw these like really significant like differences in return to substance use. So it really did suggest to us that people were using this strategically in the moment. So we didn't see any adverse events in this study, and this is really important to note that this intervention has no contraindications and really no adverse side effects. So it's really safe. Anybody can practice it, even people with cardiac conditions. In fact, this intervention is used with people with cardiac conditions to improve neurocardiac communication. 6 participants in the biofeedback group withdrew and none of the control group. So that's notable. And what do we think was happening there? Well, none of those participants who withdrew said it was anything to do with the intervention, but it was clearly adding some burden. So, that's the downside of this kind of intervention. It's not a pill that you can take and just get on with your day. It's a bit of work. So I think that's really noteworthy. And Harry spoke about the sort of heterogeneity in treatment engagement, but we still saw that significant clinical effect. So, there was no placebo in the study. This is a phase 2 trial. It was appropriately sized and powered, but we really need to do the next thing is in the sequence when we're doing our clinical trials, and this would be true for whether we're testing a device or a drug, it's phase 3 trials, which is really where we ramp things up, much larger sample. We had 120 participants in this study, which is a decent sized sample, but the phase 3 trials, really need to be much larger, and we have to have an active control group. And so in the phase 3 study, we really plan on testing HRV biofeedback against cognitive behavioral therapy, but we also want to have a group where we combine them together. And so that grant is currently under review at NIDA. So he is hoping that fares well. So just the take home here, like this technology really has capacity to reduce negative affect and craving in these folks that we care about. And it really does seem to help reduce the probability of lapses occurring. And it does seem to be that the in the moment practice is really, really what's helping people. Now, this is not, let me say, this is not a cheap intervention. This is these devices, the Leaf device is like $300 off the shelf. Anybody can go and buy it. Like right now, you could go to their website and get the product. It works perfectly out of the box. There's trainings in the app. You can pay for their subscription to the biofeedback coaching if you want it, but you don't really need it. So that's a significant amount of money in the context of like, prescriptions, psychotherapy, and ongoing costs of recovery management. It's not massive. We're starting to see some movements with reimbursement in this domain for these kinds of digital therapeutics. but we definitely need more work in that space to make sure. I think phase 3 trials will help with that, to make sure insurance companies are reimbursing for this technology so it is available to more people. So these results have just been published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA Psychiatry. I'd be happy to send the paper around if anybody wants to see it. And I'll put my email in the chat as well. But this is our information at the Recovery Research Institute. Just a little bit of flagrant self-promotion. Like, we're a great resource for the community, for you all. Like, we've really created a website that's full of evidence information about recovery and recovery science. We really wanted to be a sort of a clearinghouse for good recovery science without the stigma and the bias and the noise. So we have a dictionary on there, which is, great, to help people sort of understand both addiction and recovery. And as well, we produce a monthly bulletin, which you can all sign up for free, where we summarize 8 current studies from the clinical science, recovery science literature in a sort of Reader's Digest, easy to read, easy to digest fashion, which is really geared, to help people in the broader community, whether they be sort of just lay people in recovery or seeking recovery, or professionals like yourself, so that everybody can access recovery science. And it's not just for folks. These papers can often be very, very difficult to read and digest. So we really wanted that science to be accessible. And you can sign up for that bulletin at recoveryanswers.com, recoveryanswers.org, sorry. So I'll leave it there. I left some time for questions, I hope. It's a pleasure speaking to you all. Thanks so much for having me.
Doctor, that was excellent. Thank you. This is Alice Casey. I have a question, and I feel like you answered this throughout your presentation, but if you could you walk us through a case study, like give us an example of someone who may have been in the study, or like hypothetical, and just sort of like a day, like what is their day like if they're starting to get cravings, and like exactly what they do with the device?
Yeah. Great. So we actually, I didn't mention this, but we did a qualitative piece in this study where we ran some focus groups at the end. So we all, told people, like if you want to just give us feedback about the device, what you liked, what you didn't like, we would love that. So we ran a few focus groups, and that was really, really instructive for me, because I could really hear it, straight from the participants, like, what worked and what didn't, sort of what were the sort of glitchier things, and the points of frustration, but also what worked well. And what was really notable to me was how consistently, really everybody in the focus groups was telling us, like, this really helped me get more dialed in to my stress, and sort of more, I increased my self-awareness. And one participant, she was in early recovery from opioid use disorder, and she had she was a paralegal, pretty serious job, and she gave me sort of a little sort of walkthrough of a day in the life of her using the device through those focus groups. And she described, you charge the device overnight. She would just put it on in the morning, and she would try and do like 5 minutes of scheduled practice before she'd go to work. She had a lot of work stress, and that helped her just get out in front of some of the day's stress, because she would have anticipatory anxiety going into the day. And so, that seemed to be helping her manage that a little bit. But then through the course of the day, she noted how, sometimes she'd be sitting in a meeting that would be very, very stressful, and she would notice the device going off, and that was sort of her cues, like, oh, okay, like, there's stress here, and this is what stress feels like in my body. Like, okay, yeah, I know this feeling. I guess I just not connected the dots. And she would, engage in brief bursts of practice throughout the day. And she's really, her subjective report really was consistent with what we found, in the data, was that it would just help her manage that stress more effectively in the stream of the day. She'd do another burst of practice in the evenings. She liked to do it just before bed because it just helps slow down her mind and help her relax her body and sleep a little better. And she said she felt like she was sleeping. She had a bit of insomnia and it was sleep. She would sleep a little better. Now, she was also doing NA and in psychotherapy as well. So, she was getting help in other domains, but this was clearly helping her just manage the day-to-day stress and the stream of her life.
So, did anyone share with you, and I don't know if you can share with us, so when people, like that example that you gave, she was in a meeting and she could feel the device going off, like, are there other things, like in addition to the breathing that folks do in the moment or even during the day later that helps control what's happening with their bodies?
I mean, there's other practices we can employ. I mean, this is a breathing-based intervention, but we can also employ mindfulness strategies, right? That's another way we can manage autonomic arousal in the moment, stress flare-ups, anxiety flare-ups.
And day was that part of this? Like, did any of them do that too, or this was strictly just the breathing?
Just the breathing practice. Yeah, this is, like you could marry this, you could yoke this with other kinds of like mindfulness-based interventions, but this is just really physiologically based. I mean, that's the thing about this intervention. It's physiology, right? If you know if you're human and 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 you have human physiology, like, and you do this breathing, like, you will have this physiological response. You will see increases in rest and digest, parasympathetic engagement, and that shift in the autonomic nervous system. It's physiological. Even if you don't want it to happen and you don't believe it's going to happen, it's just going to happen because it's just mammalian physiology.
Right.
And I think that's one of the benefits here of this intervention. And I think that's something it's easier for some folks to wrap their head around or get their arms around. I've taught a lot of mindfulness, like mindfulness-based relapse prevention, and it's very, very powerful. But it's not everybody's cup of tea. It feels a bit like, like, what am I doing here? Is it really is a relaxation? And what am I supposed to be going for? It doesn't sound very scientific or evidence-based. And even though there is actually great evidence for mindfulness-based interventions, it's not for everybody. This is like, all right, well, this is physiology. Like, can you get on board with that? I mean, can we accept these are physiological phenomena? We know that stress is associated with sympathetic arousal. We know that people in early recovery from substance use disorder and a host of other mental disorders struggle to regulate negative affect stress, and that has a physiological basis. The theory makes perfect sense here.
Right.
Could you get behind that? Could you do a breathing-based intervention? Most people are like, yeah, okay, I can swallow that. And of course, it's very reinforcing too, because when you do this, like, you get a relaxation response
Right.
because that's what you're producing in the body. And of course, uh, that's notable, right? And when we get a direct benefit in response to a behavior, where it's very reinforcing. So in that way, I think the intervention, because people that often do experience immediate relief, they're more likely, more engaged, more likely to continue practicing because they actually get direct immediate benefit. It's not like CBT, where we say, look, do these skills, do these things. I'm telling, like, come to therapy, do all this work, and in about a month or two, you're going to feel better. You're going to trust me. It's going to really be hard for the first few months, but just stick with it, and it'll get better. People with this practice often feel like immediate relief. So in that way, I think it'd be salient, rewarding.
Great.
Yeah.
I think we have a question in the chat. Emily, do you want to read that?
Yes, I think we have two questions actually, both from
Mm.
Dr. Armstrong. So the first question is, how do you, so in turn, sorry.
Emily, I'm happy to ask it too. Sorry, I shouldn't have put all that shit in the chat. Do you want me to go ahead and ask?
That would be great. Go for it.
Great. So sorry about all the questions. So as I said,
Right.
I'm an addiction medicine doc at Newton Wesley Hospital, and
Great.
I have a really kind of mixed demographic. But one particular part of my population are people that are highly fitness oriented and very, very interested in, calibrating their Whoop watch with, what that looks like for their, their resting metabolic and when their stress comes on. And this device seems fantastic. But I was wondering how you see kind of clinicians clinicians in all parts of, the SUD landscape being able to really partner with their patients, because I see a huge interest from a patient and clinician side. But I'm just kind of curious how this device can be used.
Yeah, thank you for noting that. I mean, like, and there is like great synergy there. Like, I have a lot of, and it's perhaps like not what people would expect from this population, but like, um, right, we also see a lot of folks who are very fitness oriented, and yes, this is like it's an HIV monitor. It's not that different from the wrist-worn wearables like a Whoop device or even a Garmin or Fitbit or even the things an Apple Watch can do. And so I think that there are people who are interested in this stuff, like who really like can get their claws into this intervention and really love playing with the app and monitoring. The app, I didn't get into it, but it gives a lot of feedback as well on HRV throughout the day, and you can kind of get yourself in the green zone. And I don't want to say it's gamified, but it is a little bit. It's incentivized. It really sets you up for sort of a rewarding feeling when you're practicing and getting your HRV where you want it to be. And in terms of like how we can partner as providers, like the devices, the great thing about it, you don't like need to have training in HIV biofeedback for it to work. But I think as a provider, like if you got one of these devices and just played around with it and so you understood it and knew what it was doing, I think you would be well situated as a physician. You understand the physiology and what's going on. You can talk about the respiratory sinus arrhythmia and the baroreflex, and you'd be able to unpack that for a patient. And I think if you'd played around with the device and worn it for a few days, I think you would be well positioned to, have your folks, add this to as an addendum, like to, the treatments they're doing, the medication, the therapy. You'd be well situated. And I'm sure if you wrote to them and just said, "Hey, can I get a loaner?" And I could probably facilitate an introduction. I'm sure they would send you one. You could try it out, and just get a feel for what it does.
Yeah, I mean, I could really see how this device could be similar to how I sit down and go over patterns of blood pressure going down and laboratory studies changing as patients say decrease their alcohol intake.
Absolutely.
And we usually sit down and print it out, so I could see printing out the feedback from the device results. The second question I had was, many of my patients it's not fully on insurance. Is there options for patients that would find this cost prohibitive?
I don't think so, but like I think that would be a question for them. I mean, like they're for a profit company, but they really, um, the Rohan, the founder, Dixit, uh, he's been so supportive of our like research, and okay, he's got a bit of a financial interest in that, but he's very, he's he's in it for the right reasons. And so, I could see a world in which they find a way to make something work. Um, but I could connect you. That'd be more a question for him.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to put my email in the chat there if you want to reach out.
Emily, were there any other questions in the chat?
No.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Doctor, would love the paper. You mentioned the paper. So we would, if you could forward that to Emily, and is it okay? Can we share it with the group?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. If we don't have any further questions, then I think we can adjourn. Thank you. That was phenomenal. Very interesting.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure being here. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See everybody next month.